Last week, the gospel was about the division, of households, father against son, son against father. And I was pointing out in my homily that it's not about, who subscribes to every detail of the creed, etc. It's about who follows Jesus and actually exemplifies love of God and pardon and communion and mercy and hope. That's the division. So I'd like to reemphasize that this week, and I think that's the right way to interpret the narrow path. As opposed to, as it says in another gospel, the wide path that leads to destruction, the narrow path that leads to life. Again, it's not, do you know every single rule, every single dogma, or do you allow your heart to be vulnerable and opened up to love and hope and pardon and compassion, to put yourself on the line, to live in that way in the midst of a world that doesn't understand it. That's the narrow path. And it says, Jesus himself says, many will attempt to enter but won't be strong enough, because it requires great strength to be meek and vulnerable, especially in today's world. And of course, this is not simply going to be, the province of Christians, Christ's Spirit, Jesus himself is at work, through all the ways and byways of the world and all the crannies of the human heart in whatever tradition, race, or religion. If you look at Isaiah 66, the last chapter of Isaiah, which is the first reading today, speaks about people coming from all over. And it's not just, coming to Jerusalem, as it sometimes says in Isaiah, as if Jerusalem is the center of the earth, or Rome, or Mecca. I mean, all these are places where you can have an increased sense of the presence of God, but they're not it. What's it is the center of the heart, and the center of the universe, which is the heart of Christ, to which we're all called, however we understand that. For example, it mentions Javan as one of the places. That's actually Yavan in Hebrew, and it's Ionians, the Greeks, it's Greece. And even the fathers of the church themselves pointed out that, Greece and Rome, and the philosophers, etc., for all their flaws and limitations, nonetheless, that was already a kind of a real revelation. God is revealing himself on that level in that way to them. The fathers of the church affirmed that. So all the more so now, especially since Vatican II has affirmed the goodness of other traditions, we should see how the Lord is at work in all these in all people precisely to open our hearts. We're all human. We all have a human heart, as we just had this week in Ezekiel. God promises to remove the stony hearts from within us and give us natural hearts, hearts of flesh, hearts that are open and vulnerable. That's the true life, the Spirit that he wishes to give us. And if we needed any confirmation, it's not about, do I belong to the right church, or do I belong to the right group, or I belong to the right, cult or caste, within a particular tradition. Look at the gospel. I mean, it couldn't be clearer. As he continues, on from the story of the narrow gate, he says, the master will lock the house, and then, people will come and say, Lord, open for us. And he will say, I don't know you. And look what they reply. We ate and drank in your company. You taught in our streets. We went to Mass every Sunday. We said the Rosary. We adored the Eucharist. We did all the right things. And Jesus is going to say, I don't know where you're coming from. All of those things are fine, but if it doesn't actually transform you, doesn't actually open your hearts, make you less narrow-minded and constrained of heart, and actually opens you to see the goodness and the presence of Christ and the Spirit all over the world, and to participate in that by offering the pardon and the welcome and the love that Jesus gave us as his last and one commandment. He didn't say, adore me. He said, follow me, love one another as I have loved you. That's the one new commandment he gave us as his last will and testament, and that's where all our attention should focus. And Jesus actually quotes Psalm 6, depart from me, all you evildoers. I don't know where you're coming from. We went to church every Sunday. Well, I still don't know where you're coming from. if it doesn't transform your hearts and open them up. And he goes on to say, you will see not just the prophets and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, but people will come in from the east and the west and the north and the south, from all races and tribes and religions and sexual orientations. Yes, precisely the downtrodden, the neglected, the spurned, the despised, the ones who didn't get it right, who, were supposedly not on the right path. And they're the ones that Jesus receives because they were open, they were vulnerable and open to the Spirit. That's what Jesus did in his own life, right? Continually going after the prostitutes and the sinners and the lepers and the Samaritans and all those who were marginalized and rejected by the proper people, the spiritual people, the religious people. Come on. Whom are we following? Is our heart really open? And he couldn't be clearer than the last line. There's some people who are last now, the marginalized, the despised, the forgotten. Those who are last will be first. They'll be first. You'll be surprised. And many who are first now, the proper people or the religious people, the spiritual leaders and all of those, they'll be last. Just like the Pharisees and the scribes, who turn out in the same tradition, so to speak, will be last because they didn't get it. They thought it was about power and belonging to the right group. This kind of tribalism which is destroying the world, not to mention the church and the country. That's why the message of Jesus and the person of Jesus and the Spirit of Jesus are so incredibly important. So let's allow ourselves to be disciplined, to use the language of the second reading from Hebrews, by the Spirit, trained, as it says. Actually, the word discipline is a little misleading. The word that's used here is paideia, which means educated. Let the Spirit educate you, lead you out from where you are to a higher place. The Greek of the letter to the Hebrews is the most elegant and classical of the New Testament, and that word paideia means all classical education. Now we're back to the classics of the Greeks. So the same word is used for the way the Lord, discipline. It educates us. But we have to listen and allow ourselves to be taught. Jesus himself quoted that in the Gospel of John, quoting Isaiah 54. They shall all be taught by God. So we have to open our hearts and our minds every day to be taught by God, to be taught by his Spirit, to be led by his Spirit, and again, in ways that we can't predict or control. The Spirit blows where it wills. You don't know where it's coming from or where it's going. So we have to allow ourselves to be brought to places we didn't expect that may not be so proper, just like Jesus himself. That's the narrow path. From the way people are so defensive and angry and protected in our world and in our church today, it looks like there are few who find it. So we have to strive, to enter that narrow gate. Jesus himself said, "I am the gate." And by that he meant, I'm the way, my teaching, my Spirit, what I left you, what I commanded you. And I myself am your way, I'm your educator, I'm your master, I'm your teacher. So we have to allow ourselves to be educated, re-educated maybe, by that Spirit. And so enter the path that truly does lead to life, not only for ourselves and not only later, but right now for us and for all with whom we come in contact.